Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're looking at something really special. These are the Japanese localizations of the Rules Cyclopedia. I'd seen some pictures of these before and I'd heard about them, but I haven't seen anyone actually go through them on YouTube to show you what's inside. So that's what we're going to do today. One of the reasons that I haven't seen that is probably because they're actually quite difficult to find. You have to order them especially from a couple different places in Japan. They're very difficult to get here in the United States. Now, while there have been a bunch of different editions translating Dungeons & Dragons into Japanese, starting with the Beck-Me box sets, this was the first edition that was fully localized. So while the box set books just had the exact same size and format and illustrations and just changed the text into Japanese, these have been completely redesigned and reformatted for Japanese readers. One of the first things that you'll notice about these books is how tiny they are. These are really small paperbacks. It's especially obvious when you compare it against the Rules Cyclopedia, which is the edition that these are a translation of. American role-playing games tend to be large and hardback, whereas Japanese ones tend to be very small and very portable, so you can just throw it in a backpack and go. Much more inexpensive as well compared to American RPGs. The closest thing that we have in the US to these might be something like the Fighting Fantasy books, or here the Combat Heroes book. This is the one that has the first-person shooter inside it, which is pretty crazy. But you can see that these are actually even smaller than American paperbacks. These are very cute, very mini-sized. Because the format is smaller, they've been broken into 3 books. We have a book for players. This is mostly about character creation. We have a Game Master's book, and then we have a monster manual over here. But even with these 3 books, it is an abridged version of the original Rules Cyclopedia. I looked through a little bit of the Game Master's Guide here, and I translated some of it using machine translation. What I noticed was that all of the sections are the same as in the Rules Cyclopedia and in the same order, but the information is often very much abbreviated. Whereas the Rules Cyclopedia would have 3 or 4 paragraphs, this would have maybe 1, boiling it down to the most important information to use. It's also a bit abridged when it comes to levels. In the original Rules Cyclopedia, there are characters that can get up to level 36, I think. Whereas in this one, everyone tops out at level 9. And honestly, I think that's fine. You typically don't really need to go higher than level 9 in D&D, I feel. Things don't become very interesting after that level, in my opinion. All right, next we're going to jump into these books and take a look inside. But first, a shout out to today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Into the AM and their 4th of July sale, where all of their apparel is up to 60% off across their entire web store. I'm a really big fan of the relaxed button-up shirts that they've sent me. They're really cool and they're comfortable, and there's a lot of crazy designs that they have, especially this one, if you want to go in a more Gary Gygax Hawaiian shirt direction. I have been wearing these shirts for years, so I can honestly vouch for how well they hold up over time. They've gradually been replacing all of the clothes in my wardrobe, to be honest. Check out their 4th of July sale using the link in the description below to get an extra 10% off of the already marked down items. Thanks a lot to Into the AM, and now let's get back to the show. All right, let's take a look through the first book here, the D&D Players book. One of the most interesting things about these books is the art style, which was all done by the illustrator behind the Record of the Lodos War series. That was a popular replay or actual play of D&D that came out several years before this, I believe, that helped popularize D&D in Japan. So it's interesting to see the Japanese take on what the classes and the races of D&D look like. I should point out that I'm actually giving away all of these books at the end of this month to one person who is subscribed to the Questing Beast newsletter. So if you are not, check out the link in the description below, put your email in, and you will be in the running for them. Our interior flap says, experience a fantasy of sword and magic adventure in real life. Known as the origin of RPGs, role-playing games, the latest rules and data from the famous Dungeons & Dragons have been compiled into the D&D Rules Cyclopedia, now appearing at last. This book introduces rules and data related to the characters played by players, from character classes such as warriors, mages, and elves, to weapons like short swords, bows, armor like chainmail, and various kinds of magic. It is packed with information every player wants to know. The original book, Dungeons & Dragons Game Rules Cyclopedia, has been fully translated by Yasuda Hitoshi, a prominent figure in the RPG world. From beginners to advanced players, a must-see 3-part series for all D&D fans. This is Volume 1. All the translations I've done were done by machine translation, so please forgive me if they're not completely accurate, but hopefully they get the general idea across. That is such a great illustration. So we can see what all the classes are going to look like in this book from a Japanese perspective. Over here, we have the Cleric. Uses healing spells and fights with weapons. It has a special ability called Turn Undead to repel zombies and skeletons. Number 2 down here, we have Fighters. Uses all kinds of weapons, good at fighting, gains experience in close combat, has high hit points, but also takes many hits from enemies. Magic users are over here, poor at weapon attacks and has low hit points, but possesses powerful spells and various magical abilities. These are our thieves, limited in usable weapons and armor, but has many special abilities such as opening locks and hiding in shadows. And because this is the rule cyclopedia, we also have race as class. So we have dwarves over here, a sturdy demi-human race with short stature and stocky build, resembles human children, but are strong and resilient, not friendly with elves. Our elves are over here, a demi-human race with elegant features, uses both sword and magic in adventures, grows very slowly. And here we have our halflings over here, a small demi-human race resembling human children. Their small bodies make them effective in fighting large monsters. This page is information about cleric spells like Cure Light Wounds. By praying to the god they serve, clerics gain the ability to use protective and healing spells. Among the most commonly used is the healing spell Cure Light Wounds. This spell restores 2 to 7 hit points. In contrast to the cleric spells, we have wizard spells or magic user spells over here, where it's talking about Fireball. Magic users' spells are cast by memorizing and chanting the contents recorded in spellbooks. Magic Missile and Fireball are primarily offensive spells. A 5th level magic user can cast Fireball, launching a sphere of flame that deals 5 to 30 points of damage. That's a really fun illustration of this glowing ball of light, and then you can see a monster disintegrating down there at the end of the hallway. Here we just have an illustration of lots of different types of weapons and armor listed over here, like plate mail, chainmail, battle axes, swords, slings, clubs, longbows, daggers, and then a page on your standard adventuring equipment: wine, rope, tinderbox, bags, emergency rations, backpacks, and so forth. One neat thing is that if you take the dust jacket off, there's information on the other side. So we have this really cool illustration of the night sky. Not completely sure what it's in reference to. But inside the dust jacket, we have the character sheet, which definitely resembles what we see in BXD&D and the Rules Cyclopedia. You can see there's an attack matrix down there for calculating what you have to roll when you're using THAC0. The text of the book is all written vertically. Not sure how common that is in RPGs and novels in Japan, but that's an interesting feature. We have some great illustrations here, like we have our players sitting around the table, actually playing the game. Not sure who this guy is in the background. Maybe that's supposed to be the dungeon master. Unclear to me. The different types of dice that you're going to use. Now, one of the problems with D&D spreading in early role-playing game history in Japan was that a lot of these polyhedral dice were not very available. That's one of the reasons why Sword World, which was another fantasy RPG that only used D6s, really took off soon after the Lodos War. Thinking up your character. You can imagine yourself as a big Conan the Barbarian guy that everyone loves. An example of a party of adventurers with all of your different classes. You get your elves, your clerics, your fighters, your thieves, and so forth. This chapter might be on character proportions because we have a human there compared against a halfling. More details on our character classes. So first off, we have the cleric, very Christian themed in a way that is often not emphasized in Dungeons and Dragons today, although it more was in early D&D. A lot of the cleric spells were things from the Bible, for example. A great image there of a cleric using their heal wounds ability to heal the fighter. Here's our prototypical fighter, the big shield and a cross on it. Again, very kind of crusader or Christian themed. We have some more illustrations of him right there, looking very gritty and determined. I believe that is our magic user down there with her staff. And we have our thief over here as well with the world's longest legs. Here's what our dwarf looks like with his big battle axe. There's our elf with their very long and pointy ears, which tends to be typical of how elves are often represented in anime, I found. And our halfling, who is, as usual, asleep. I don't know what most of these pages say, but it's kind of fun to try and guess by looking at the illustrations. Perhaps this is rules on how to roll dice? Most of this book does not have a lot of illustrations, to be honest. It's mostly just solid text. It's very much a reference book, but the occasional illustrations are quite a lot of fun. For example, this one, where you have our group of heroes facing off against a number of monsters, about to pounce on them from the darkness. One of the things I like about in illustrations in early D&D is how the characters often appear to be in actual peril. I feel like I can empathize with them a bit more, and it gets me more excited about going on the adventure. We also have characters mapping, a very essential task to do when exploring dungeons in early D&D. Casting light in a hallway to detect any monsters lurking further down there. This section of the book seems to be mostly about the economy, about money and items and weapons and things like that you can buy. So examples of bows and crossbows and slings, lots of different stats for your different types of weapons. Lots of examples of different kinds of polearms. Gary would be proud. This looks like an armored griffin, so maybe mounts that you can acquire as well. I love sheets like this where you see all the different types of equipment that you're going to need on a dungeon crawl all laid out in front of you. That way the players can look through it as if they're shopping and pick the stuff that they're going to need. I also like being able to visualize the physical items that I'm carrying, because often you can use them in unorthodox ways when you can do that. Information on different types of boats that you can buy. Several different types of ships here. We have like a big multi-level oared ship. We have more of a caravel or canoes or rafts. There's different levels of bunks here, probably representing the different types of quarters that you can afford depending on the level of lifestyle that you want to pay for when you're in a city. There's even a section on different types of siege weapons, which is always really fun. Near the back, there's a nice big reference section going over lots of different tables for probably looks like weapon stats and item costs and so forth. And then that's about it for the book. There is an extra section here for your character sheet as well, if you want another picture of it. One neat thing is that there was actually an ad at the back of the book for another book in this series, I think, that is an RPG replay called Sealed Legend Cristania, which is essentially a written version of an actual play for people who don't want to play D&D, but you want to read about people playing it, kind of like before there was YouTube. There's also an ad here for Dengeki Adventures, a fantasy and RPG magazine. So if you want more adventures or even want stories from a D&D-like world, you could subscribe to this. Our second book is the D&D Rules Cyclopedia for Dungeon Masters. And here's what it says on our inside front cover. The Dungeons & Dragons Rules Cyclopedia is a comprehensive compilation of the latest rules for D&D, the origin of fantasy RPGs. The second volume includes practical rules necessary for actual play, such as movement, encounters, and combat, along with detailed data on topics such as dungeon creation and magical items. It is packed with information essential for becoming a DM, Dungeon Master. From how to introduce monsters to the specific steps of combat and how to guide new players, the book explains everything with abundant examples. This makes it not only an essential guidebook for beginner DMs, but also a valuable resource for players who want to deepen their understanding of the D&D world. Thanks to a complete translation by RPG industry veteran Hitoshi Yasuda, the Japanese edition of the Dungeons & Dragons Game Rules Cyclopedia is finally here. It is unusual that the Dungeon Master on the front is portrayed as female, which I think is a little bit unusual, especially for the time. Inside the front cover, we have not a character sheet, but it looks like a section for writing up NPCs and monsters and recording their stats. That's what I would guess this is for. The Dungeon Master must create the setting where the adventure will unfold. The setting of an adventure can vary greatly depending on the scenario. It could be a dungeon, a wilderness, a town, or something else entirely. If the setting is outdoors, the DM draws maps using hexes for wilderness areas. These maps indicate important places in the adventure, such as towns, rivers, and individual landmarks. The DM considers what kind of monsters might appear in each location and prepares suitable encounters. The DM may also prepare traps or monsters based on the purpose of the location. Lastly, the DM refers to Chapter 13, Creating Adventures, for details on how to create a compelling setting. We've got a fight scene where our party is blasting away at some monsters. Nothing is more thrilling than the moment when dice are rolled in battle. Will the dice favor the characters? Or, when a party of characters explores a dungeon or wilderness, combat with monsters is inevitable. However, not all situations lead directly to battle. Sometimes NPCs, non-player characters, and monsters may show interest in the party's items or information and initiate contact for trade or negotiation. In combat with monsters, the DM, Dungeon Master, plays the role of judge. Strong monsters might decide to retreat, or weaker monsters might surrender. Some monsters designed to oppose the party may even ambush them or lure them into traps. Finally, for details on combat rules and monster behavior, refer to Chapter 8, Combat. The dungeon. I love how this illustration just has a chest in the corner there, because, it's probably a mimic. Beyond distant time and space, awaiting brave visitors, memories of ancient eras. When the door is opened, what will the adventurers see? A dungeon is an underground location where monsters and treasure can be found. Dungeons can include natural caves, ancient ruins, abandoned temples, and other perilous places. DMs can design traps such as pits, mazes, or teleportation zones for dungeon exploration. Monsters that guard treasure, wandering monsters, random encounters, and many others appear in the dungeon. Whether the dungeon is the main objective of the adventure or simply a part of it, it will challenge players and their characters alike. Treasure. The many treasures earned through grueling adventures. Each and every one of them holds a legend. In dungeons, you may find treasures that cannot be obtained in shops. These treasures can include scrolls inscribed with magical spells, staves imbued with magical power, or even intelligent swords with minds of their own, among many other types. What treasures the players acquire is up to the DM. The DM must decide based on player level and game balance when and how to place magical treasures. Let's take a look at some of the illustrations that we get inside here, like our party marching along. Some of them don't look terribly happy. We have our characters about to wander directly into a monster who is looking for something to eat. There's a couple of different types of monsters down here. I think these are random tables for deciding what monsters are going to appear in different zones, like on different dungeon levels. A portrayal of town life outside the dungeon when you are restocking and recuperating. These might be different types of NPCs or people that you can hire. It could be like a sage or maybe a noble. I'm guessing that could be a hireling. One thing I enjoy is how the book does not take adventuring too seriously. There's a level of goofiness to some of the illustrations that I think is a lot of fun and is better reflective of how players tend to actually play D&D. We got more boats and some ship-to-ship battles over here. It's neat how these old games had rules for everything, even though I think actual sea combat was pretty uncommon. We've got our hero taking out a monster of some kind, and it looks like our two clerics humming a tune. Is this about the power of song? I don't know. Our warrior is not having a good time here. It looks like he's been cursed perhaps by some magic item. This looks like a section for magic items. We got some potions. We got some, there's a ring down there, and all the typical stuff that DMs are going to need to put in the dungeon for players to grab and use and possibly get cursed by. This looks like a section on scrolls and possibly trying to identify scrolls, because identifying items in old school D&D was often a big deal. You would get magic items and you would have no idea what they did. You need to find someone who could help you. There's all sorts of charts and tables at the back, useful for dungeon masters, including this hex grid, although these are really tiny hexes. You're going to have a very hard time creating a map with that, I feel like. Looks like general stats for different types of monsters and levels in a dungeon to help you figure out how to populate it. At least that's what it looks like based on stuff I've seen in the rule cyclopedia. And then we've got an index at the back. Our last book here is Monsters, so let's see how these books interpret D&D monsters through a Japanese lens. The opening flap here says, a new game genre, the RPG, lets you experience the world of fantasy as if it were real. The famous originator of RPGs, Dungeons & Dragons, now appears in the Dengeki Game Bunko series. With an easy-to-understand system and an engaging fantasy world, D&D has had a major influence on fantasy RPGs. Among its many editions, the latest rule and data compilation, the Rule Cyclopedia, has been fully translated by RPG expert Yasuda Yasuhiko. This book, Monsters, is a complete data compilation of approximately 200 monsters introduced in the Rule Cyclopedia. From beginners to advanced players, it is a must-have volume for RPG fans, both enjoyable to read and useful to play. Unfortunately, it looks like there is nothing behind this cover. It's just blank, so no extra useful material there. Here's our first section of monsters. We got ogres and minotaurs. There are trolls. I believe this one is a troll. Golems, mummies, dragon. We got a hydra, an ochre jelly. I think that's a kobold, a gargoyle, and a bat. Monsters await in dungeons and ruins. I like how these monsters actually have glowing red eyes, which is not only a classic monster trope, but is, I think, more or less lore accurate, since a lot of these monsters would be able to see using infrared vision. And I think in some of the D&D books, it describes them as actually having glowing red eyes. Monsters are everywhere. In the D&D world, you will encounter monsters in surprising places. In rocky mountain caves lurk ferocious lions and goblins. Forests into which you flee are filled with orcs and giants appearing one after another. And deep in the dungeon at last awaits a terrible dragon. Over here we got the giant and goblins. That's a chimera, unicorns of course, a wolf. Orcs is a pig-faced orc, that's always the best kind of orc. A manticore, an elf, maybe it's a dark elf, and a dwarf. Various monsters of the sea and sky. Looks like a wyvern, a griffin, a hippogriff. There's a harpy, dolphins, whales, sharks. This is a sea elf and a mermaid. In D&D, many types of monsters appear. They not only block your adventures, but sometimes lend you a hand. So we have humanoids, creatures with 2 arms and 2 legs that stand upright, includes goblins and ogres. There's animals, low intelligence living things like wolves, bears, giant spiders, snakes, slimes, and invertebrates. Monsters, which are creatures that don't belong into any other type, often have special traits and are imaginary beings of legend, like maybe a dragon. There's magical creatures, creatures that are created by magic, including manticores, chimeras, gargoyles, and magic beasts. Undead, zombies, ghouls, skeletons, and other undead beings animated by negative energy. Planar monsters, creatures from other planes of existence, like Efreet, elementals, demons, devils, and others. Dragons, king of monsters, including true dragons, hydras, salamanders, wyverns, and other related creatures. Plants, carnivorous plants and other dangerous plants that attack adventurers. And just giant animals, ordinary animals that have grown to gigantic size, like giant snakes, giant insects, and more. Let's see what these different types of creatures look like. Not sure what's happening here, but it could be a creature that is disguised as a human, because there's kind of a cloud of smoke down there. Maybe it's an illusion ready to attack you. This is a really fun piece of art. It reminds me of the art in Fighting Fantasy, the kind of raw black and white style. Not every monster in this book seems to have an illustration. The illustrations are only kind of sporadic. It's very much focused on just the text itself. So you get a lot of pages where there isn't really any art at all, and then you just get a little picture popping up to help you figure out what you're looking at. That looks like a gargoyle and probably a chimera. Different types of eagles and birds, slimes, kind of a panther-like there. We got a saber-toothed tiger maybe, or maybe just a dire wolf. Looks like a devil or an imp. Crocodiles. Maybe this is animated armor. It looks an awful lot like Alphonse Elric from Full Metal Alchemist, although this book definitely came out before then. That's a great goblin creature. Looks sufficiently deranged. Maybe it's a kobold. His face is a little bit wolf-like, and I know in early D&D, they were often portrayed more dog-like than dragon-like, but I bet it's a goblin. Hard to say. Well, here's a fun one. Maybe it's a shadow, like I was just a solid black silhouette there. Your typical skeletons. You've got your displacer beasts. These creatures are really fun because the whole design of this creature came from a plastic toy that the Lake Geneva people had lying around. Just a kind of weird toy, and they decided it looked like a panther with tentacles coming out of its back, and that's what it turned into. Very regal looking dragon right there. And we also have a troll. Indeed, it says troll right over there on the side. Some of these have English translations and some of them do not. I'm not totally sure which ones do and which ones don't and why that is. We got a bugbear and a basilisk, always a great creature. What else is in here? There is a hydra, and we have a hippogriff. No, that's a fairy. This is a dog. Oh, it's probably a blink dog because it seems to be jumping out of this portal. Yeah, like this one. Oh, there it says blink dog right there. Can't always find the translation. Pegasi. A lot of just normal animals. I don't think those need illustrations. We want more monster illustrations, guys. The Medusa. And what else? We have a unicorn I saw in here. There it is. It's a pretty good piece of art. Werewolves, lycanthropes. Oh, a rust monster. Another one of the creatures that is derived from a plastic toy that they had. I like this illustration at the back of this zombie master vampire controlling these undead. Perhaps it's supposed to be Strahd? I thought this ad was really interesting because it seems to be for a Dungeons & Dragons novel that I think was only published in Japan. Hard to say. It's called The Knights of Penhaligon. At least that's the literal translation that I was able to find. Author was DJ Heinrich, so maybe a European writer. And it says over here, a magnificent tale of heroic blades now boldly begins. In the cursed land of Penhaligon, a strange journey of battle undertaken by Jo, a girl who longs to become a knight, is about to start. This is the first installment in the newest series of Dungeons & Dragons novels. Well, there you go, guys. That's my flip through of the Japanese adaptation of the Rules Cyclopedia. I won't really have a link in the description to pick these up since there isn't a normal place where you can buy them. You might be able to dig up some copies on eBay, although they're fairly expensive. Keep in mind that I will be giving these away to one subscriber to the Questing Beast newsletter, so that's one way to try and get a hold of them if you don't want to buy one yourself. The form factor is really interesting. They're so much more portable than a big fat hardback. But the downside is that there's not very much information per page, so you have to do a lot of flipping to find what you want. Some of these largest books are many hundreds of pages. This is like 540 pages long, for example. But I thought these books were a very interesting window into a very different vision of what the world of D&D looks like, both in terms of the world and the characters, but even the format of the books themselves. The fact that these books are so much smaller, they're so much cheaper, and they visually tie in with a lot of pop culture makes them much more accessible for normal people to pick up and grab and maybe try out with their friends. In any case, I hope you found this interesting. Remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.